The year was 1942. The place? Walt Disney Studios. Production on the animated feature film Bambi was nearing its end, and director David Hand was looking for a new project. Fellow animator Jack Kinney's wife, Ava, suggested a book to Hand that she'd gotten from the Book of the Month Club. Hand found potential in the book and wrote a memo summarizing it for his boss, Walt Disney. Walt had great respect for Hand's opinions and decided to read the book himself. As Walt turned the pages, he became enthralled and couldn't stop reading. The ideas seemed to leap off the page. In his own words, he would later say that the book he was reading seemed to clarify and crystallize his convictions, and in a short time, Walt knew he had found the basis for his next feature film. Unlike his usual fare, though, this book was no classic fairy tale or children's story. It was a non-fiction book on military strategy called Victory Through Air Power. Written by Russian World War I veteran and emigre to the United States, Major Alexander P. de Seversky, the book posited the theory that air power would soon make land and sea power obsolete. Among other things, Seversky argued that just as Germany's destruction of France's famous Maginot Line and Japan's bombing at Pearl Harbor had shown, the Allies would have to commit to air power to truly secure victory. He believed that the US should become the dominant force in air power, similar to England's former dominance in sea power. Seversky also advocated for the creation of an independent air force, which the US did not yet have, and for the creation of long-range bombers. At this time, the war had no clear outcome. It was a desperate struggle, and Walt was so convinced that this book was the key to winning the war, he was determined to make a film that successfully communicated Seversky's ideas to an American mass audience. He immediately went about securing the rights to Seversky's book and contacted the author to consult. However, it was soon decided that Seversky himself would star in the film. 2/3 of the film would consist of animated sequences, and 1/3 would consist of live-action scenes where Seversky would speak directly to camera. This was a decidedly uncommercial concept, essentially being a lecture in movie form, and Disney could not afford to make uncommercial concepts. During the course of the war, Walt had lost many of his best artists, either through conscription or enlistment. In addition, Disney had suffered major losses from the lack of European distribution caused by the war, as well as a recent animators' strike, and the studio's resources were nearly depleted. This made Victory Through Air Power an unwise financial decision. Walt didn't care. He pushed forward with the project with no concern for profit. A decade later, Walt would say, "I didn't do it to make money. I didn't do it to lose money, but I made it because I wanted to do it." As with his adaptations of classic European folk tales, Walt and his artists would adapt Victory to make it more pleasing to a general audience, and to the government. Seversky's book was filled with criticisms of the US military, as well as a fairly negative view of aircraft carriers. Walt removed these things, both to please the military and because he simply didn't agree with them. Thanks to Walt's diplomacy, the film, unlike the book, would have at least some military support, and it was going to need it. Disney was determined to get the film out quickly, giving his animators just 14 months to complete their sequences. Though the war had taken a number of great Disney artists, Walt was lucky to still be left with some of his best. James Algar, director of the Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence in Fantasia, Jack Kinney, prolific director of Donald Duck shorts, and Clyde Geronimi, who would be the director on numerous classic Disney films, including Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan, all worked as animation sequence directors on the film. Previously mentioned Bambi director David Hand, who had also directed Snow White, would be animation supervisor. Perce Pierce and Herb Ryman would work on the story, while legendary members of Disney's Nine Old Men, Mark Davis and Ward Kimball, would also do animation, with Kimball being in charge of the early sequence on the history of aviation. Walt had already been working on this idea, and after reading Seversky's book, he chose to combine the two. Ward Kimball would later say of the sequence, "On Victory Through Air Power, I felt I was fortunate in having the most fun on the picture, because I got to do the historical stuff. I was fascinated with old airplanes, and I just thought it was a lark animating the first Wright brothers flight and the early battles between the German and French. I did a lot of authentic research." The live-action sequences would be directed by H.C. Potter and would be shot at Disney Studios in Burbank, California. This would be done late at night, so as to avoid noise from the nearby Lockheed Aircraft Factory. Animators, writers, directors, Everyone was working around the clock to get this film finished as quickly as possible. The pressure was on. This was Walt's most important film. Finally, the day came to screen Victory for Disney's regular distributor, RKO. They were not happy. RKO were used to Disney's lighthearted family fare and had no interest in releasing a war-focused, hour-long documentary, so they refused to distribute the film. Walt was forced to go to United Artists, a smaller distributor. RKO's skepticism would turn out to be well-founded. Victory Through Air Power released to the public on July 17, 1943. On a budget of $788,000, the film grossed $799,000, a flop, just as Walt knew it would be. Critical reception for the film was largely positive, though. The New York Times, in their review of the film, said, "Through a brilliantly technicolored array of maps and diagrams, Mr. Disney and his artists have animated de Seversky's ideas with a clarity which could never be achieved simply through the spoken word." The New York Mirror also praised the adaptation, calling it Disney's greatest film. The Communist Daily Worker was less flattering, calling Victory the wickedest film in the world. Walt hadn't made the film for the critics, though. He was determined to have it seen by government officials who could act directly to implement its ideas. One man who saw it was Albert Lasker, American businessman and philanthropist. In 1921, Lasker, who was of Jewish descent, had been appointed chairman of the United States Shipping Board under the Harding administration and was one of the first Jewish men in America to hold an office of such importance. Like Walt before him, Lasker became obsessed with Seversky's arguments. He tried again and again to arrange a meeting between Seversky and President Roosevelt, or at least to arrange a screening of Victory at the White House, but he could never manage to pull it off, possibly due to the influence of FDR's chief of staff, Admiral William Leahy. According to a biography of Lasker, he did eventually succeed, with the help of a British friend, in getting Victory screened for Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was supposedly much impressed with the film. In the summer of 1943, Churchill attended the Quebec Conference with Roosevelt, where critical military decisions for the D-Day invasion of Europe were to be made. The conference became gridlocked at one point, when Roosevelt and Churchill could not agree on a date for the invasion. It was Churchill's position, along with several others, that the invasion should not proceed until the Allies had achieved total control of the air over the English Channel. The two sides went back and forth, going over their arguments again and again, until Churchill suddenly blurted out, "Well, of course you've seen Victory Through Air Power," to which FDR responded, "No, what's that?" A print of the film was immediately flown by fighter plane from New York to Quebec, and a private screening for the two leaders was arranged. Roosevelt was blown away. He loved the thrilling animation of American planes devastating the enemy, and found himself sucked into the film's arguments. A second screening took place the next day, after which FDR invited his Joint Chiefs of Staff to watch the film. According to the Lasker biography, it was then that the Allies decided to commit to air power in the D-Day invasion. It's a fact that after the conference, the Allies adopted a hard bias towards air power. In a telegram sent from FDR and Churchill to Stalin, it said, "The bomber offensive against Germany will be continued on a rapidly increased scale from bases in the United Kingdom and Italy. The objectives of this air attack will be to destroy the German air combat strength, to dislocate the German military, industrial, and economic system." The effects wouldn't just be felt there, though. After a screening of the film for the Royal Navy, a group of officers would be inspired by a sequence in the film depicting a hypothetical concrete-piercing, rocket-propelled bomb. They would immediately start work on a project that would eventually result in an actual bomb of this type, known as the Disney bomb. Walt had done it. He had almost single-handedly affected military policy through the use of his art. For years after, Walt would proudly tell colleagues about Victory's screening at the conference, doing so in at least one interview. Seversky, too, would speak fondly of the story, telling it publicly many times. Despite this, there are very few sources for the story, and both Disney and Seversky waited a decade to talk about it, leading many to doubt its authenticity. Documents concerning the Quebec Conference are few due to the deliberate secrecy of the meeting, so it's no surprise that there are no direct pieces of evidence proving the film was screened there. It is, however, notable that Seversky repeatedly referred to General Lawrence S. Cutter as the pilot who retrieved the print of Victory. Cooter had numerous opportunities to correct Seversky's story, but he never did. Cooter also never confirmed the story, but this may be due to his commitment to secrecy, as, for example, ultra-top secret level information was only declassified 3 decades after the war. This may also explain both Walt and Seversky waiting a decade to tell the story. So did this movie win World War II? Probably not. How much effect the film had on Allied military policy is still in dispute, and the Russian army's victory at Stalingrad in 1943 had signaled to many the inevitable defeat of the Axis. Air power would be crucial in winning the war, though, and would be used extensively in both Germany and Japan, ultimately culminating in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The haunting animations of American planes taking off and bombing Japanese cities feel particularly ominous in retrospect. One scene of devastation was left in the storyboard phase. Disney Studios illustrator Bill Peet wrote in his autobiography that Walt asked him to draw up storyboards for a hypothetical enemy air raid on New York City, the last shot of which was to depict the Statue of Liberty sinking into New York Harbor. It's not clear why the sequence was cut, though I'd imagine this was done to make the film more palatable to its intended audience. Although Victory Through Air Power had been possibly Walt's most important film, he would choose to never re-release it in his lifetime. Unlike other wartime productions like Chicken Little, Victory had not been intended to be viewed after the war, as it was assumed it would be of little interest. The scenes of air raids on German and Japanese territory may also have been deemed in bad taste now that they were allies. Even after Walt's death, the film would remain locked away in the vault for a total of 60 years. The only part of the film shown to the public would be the history of aviation sequence. Finally, in 2004, the film was released, restored and unedited, on the Walt Disney Treasures On the Frontline DVD set. When viewed by a modern audience, Victory Through Air Power may be a difficult watch for some. As I said, it's essentially a lecture, which some people will find boring. On the other hand, fans of YouTube may actually like this approach. Seversky, despite his accent, is easy enough to understand, and director H.C. Potter manages to make him seem fairly casual. However, the animation is hands down the reason to see this film. Some of the greatest artists from the heyday of Disney animation worked on this project, and it's impossible not to marvel at certain sequences. Notable standouts include the Maginot Line sequence, which to me really feels like it may have been an influence on Gerald Scarfe in his animation for the Goodbye Blue Skies sequence in Pink Floyd The Wall. Other standouts would be the aforementioned concrete-piercing, rocket-propelled bomb dropped on a German submarine pen, and a climactic air raid on Japan done in a deliberately minimalistic style that gives a sense of realism to the proceedings. It's notable that the air raid scenes contain no actual depictions of German or Japanese citizens, allowing the viewer to revel in the destruction without having to consider the human cost. In the modern era, aerial bombardment is seen by many as inhumane, which honestly it is, but it may also have been necessary to defeat the Axis powers. For these reasons, the air raid scenes may be difficult for some viewers to watch. Victory Through Air Power is not on Disney+, probably for the same reasons it was locked in the vault, but the aforementioned On the Frontlines DVD set can be found for a pretty good price on eBay, and the film is also on YouTube. I want to give credit real quick to Paul F. Anderson, to whom I owe much of the material regarding the authenticity of Disney and Seversky's claims about the Quebec Conference. Anderson did an amazing job investigating the subject, which you can read all about in his article on winstonchurchill.org, which I will include a link to in the description. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Certainly, that one is a little bit more in tune with some of the earlier videos that I put out. I try to do different kinds of stuff, so I hope everybody's cool with that. Quick note on my thumbnails. They are clickbaity. They've always been clickbaity, and I think that's fine as long as it's not deceptive. And I hope that you guys agree with that as well. I feel like it's just advertising to get someone to watch the video, and hopefully you didn't find this clickbait, this thumbnail to be too deceptively clickbaity. I'll have a new one for you on the regularly scheduled day, usually Fridays, but some days it'll be Saturdays just because it gives me a little more time. But yeah, so I'll see you guys again real soon. Park Narcs, woo!